Good morning, everybody. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to develop simple application with Spring Boot. In the application, we will be using component service repository annotations. So basically, from main method, we call component. So in the component annotation, the component class will be creating an entity object, and we are sending that object to service layer. From service layer, we will be calling repository persistent layer, so that is going to save the data into database. Basically it's like a MVC pattern. So from main method we'll be calling component, from component service layer, model layer, and database. So if you look at, basically component will call service layer will call repository layer. In that repository persistent layer we will having JPA repository interface extensions as well as data source details. So from that we will send the data to database. So we will be using component annotation. So we will create a component, we will create a class, put iterate component on the top of the class, and inside we'll create an entity class and we'll call service layer from component. But if you look at component annotation, is like it's a annotation, it's a stereotype annotation. If you put iterate component on the top of any class, Spring, when the main application starts, Spring will create application context. During that time, it will find all the components, all the stereotype annotations, means either repository, component, service, all these annotations, components it will find and create, initialize those objects will be available at application context. And one more thing, when you extend the JPA repository, it's going to create proxy implementations of JPA repository and available those implementations in the project. So as I said, the repository annotation is nothing but is an extension of component annotation, plus it will deal with the database. So it will work, we use it persistent layer. It's a stereotype annotation, it's a class level annotation. Whenever you extend an annotation like JPA repository or crew repository, Spring Boot, it will create proxy classes implementations for us. We are not going to implement those interfaces. Spring automatically implement create repository or JPA repository, whichever you use. Spring takes care of implementing those interfaces. Service annotation. So this annotation will put at the top of the class. That class will become a service annotation, service layer. It will deal with the persistent layer. And also user component annotations, component classes will call this layer. So this layer between component layer and persistent layer, and is an extension of component, is a stereotype annotation, is a class level annotation. So we'll be using S2 database for the Spring Boot application. So it's like a lightweight database, and whenever you start an application, the data source will be created based on the property files details that you provide, and whenever you shut down the application, data will be vanished. So for the H2 database, we will be using these details: URL, driver class, username, password, and platform. And also make sure that you need to enable the console to access the console details from the browser. So for that you need to use spring.h2.console enabled equal to true, means you can access the database from the browser and see the database details, the table details. So to create the sample project for the simple data insertion, so we need to fill the S2 details in the application properties. We need to create entity class, I will to create user interface, user repository which extends JPA repository, and we need to create user service class and component class. From component class, we'll create entity, we'll call service, from service we call repository. So this is how we do. Let's create a simple project. So access this URL should be Maven, Spring Boot version 340 I'm using. So group will be com.sample app. I'm not changing anything else. Should be var file, should be Java 17. I will add JPA repository, JPA dependency, as well as h2. Perfect. So I'm adding JPA as well as h2 status. So it will add target jars, dependent jars, relative jars, which are needed for the database persistence. Create this project. Click on generate. Hello. Perfect. So I have imported the package, means project. Let's run the base project. Yeah, running, no issues at 8080 port. So if you look at here, it's bootstrapping JPA because we have used JPA dependency. And Tomcat is running at 8080. Connection pool has been created, a Hikari pool, and Hibernate is automatically configured, and initialized JPA entity manager for the transactions. So yeah, so table creation, nothing has happened because we didn't create any entities. So let's do something here. Let's create the packages. Entity repository. Okay, spelling mistake. Let's see. Repository service. Let's create component package. Component. Perfect. Okay. So let's fill this guy. Application properties for the H. So these are all the details for H2 database. Let's create an entity here. User. So this should be entity. So create a user primary key column. Private. Perfect. User ID. Okay. This should be the ID. Next, username, ID and username. Let's create parameterized constructor. Perfect. Create a toString. Perfect. So let me create a default constructor. Public. Perfect. Now create a repository. User repository. Extends JPA. So, okay, how you say JPA, not crude. So user, this guy is available. Perfect. So let's take this guy's integer, and this guy's integer. Perfect. Create a service. So in this, what we'll do, create user. Public void create the implementation. Perfect. So we need to, so what we need to do, so whenever this guy is called, we need to call the persistent layer from service layer. So user repository. So yes, so I'm getting this object. Okay, this should be the service. I'm getting this object. So on this object, what I will do, I need to do the save of user. So I should be getting the user object and saving that object. Unimplement method, what is that? Okay, here user, yeah, that error is gone. So this is done. Application properties has been filled in. Service layer is done. Repository layer is done. Entity is done. Create a component. User component. This should be the component, component. Okay, so what I will do, I need to inject the service layer here, service component, user service, auto wire. Perfect. So create a entity object, user equal to new user. One comma Java. Okay, this is done. So I need to create a method so that whenever I create a component and if I call this method a method, entity should be created object. So what I will do, create component. Okay, user component. Required user dot create user. Perfect. So from entity I'm calling a service. So this service is saving the data into database. So what we need to do here, we need to call the component. For that one, we need to get the application context. So we got the application context. So from application context, we should get the bean. Which bean? User bean. Okay, let's put the name for the bean. Perfect. So this is the bean. So I would say give me the user component type of bean. Okay, so simple, bean dot create component. I think you don't need this. Okay, so yeah, done. So let's revive the application. So I'm running the Spring Boot main application, main method. So I'm getting application context. From context I'm asking, can you get the bean of user component? So I got the bean for this component. I'm calling a method on the bean. So what is doing, it's creating in this class, it's creating a user object and sending this user object to the service layer. So service layer, what it is doing, simply it's calling creating an object for this particular user repository and sending this user object. So that user object will be saved in the database. So which database? These are the database details. So rerun this application. See, bootstrapping Spring Boot JPA default mode. Tomcat has been initialized at 8080. See, web application context initialized 676 milliseconds. Connection pool, data source has been created. These are all the Hibernate configuration details. See, drop table if exist, user table has been deleted if it is available, and creating user table and user ID not null and primary key. Yeah, you setting up creating a table with these columns and setting up the primary key. And see here, insert into, so username, user ID and username. So insert has been done. Let's check the database. So let's provide the password. Run save. See, user table has been created. Run. One Java has been inserted. So in this example, we just created a table and insert the data into the database by using 3 components: editor component, service, repository, and entity. 4 components.